Hey, welcome, welcome. Hey. Uptown, uptown. Cause all we do is win. Yes. Welcome to another Shine with Tish podcast. I have the lovely Dr. Kristelle Beecher here with me. We are talking about all things HR, industrial, organizational, human resources, and you are the special guest. We're spotlighting you. Welcome. Please introduce yourselves to our listening audience.
Thank you so much, Tish. It's great to be here. It's an honor. I appreciate you connecting with me. As you mentioned, I'm Kristelle Beecher. I am a people person. I like to see myself as a people enthusiast. In every environment I show up in, I bring myself to that environment. A lot of what I see through, or the lens I use, is through HR, through IO psychology, as you mentioned, also through cultural and diverse bodies of thought. And I like to think of people as an entire spectrum, and that's what I choose to highlight in every environment I'm in. It's great to be.
I absolutely adore. I do want to say shout out to Forbes HR Council, and that's where I met Kristelle in our quarterly meetup and connect. Did you always know you wanted to be an AI psychologist? Can you explain your journey of how did you? I mean, I remember growing up, there's like doctors, lawyers, nurse, teacher, firefighter. How did you come to this profession?
Absolutely. I actually did not know and did not set out to be an IO psychologist. And IO psychology is a relatively new industry, it's a relatively new domain. When I was young, I loved writing, and I was such a writer because I have kept each of my journals up until this day. I still have my very first journal, and I was probably 7 or 8. And here I am having these big emotions and thoughts about my experience. And so I grew up a long time. At one point, I wanted to be a dentist, but I grew up a long time.
You do have beautiful teeth.
Thank you. It's funny because I actually used to have very big gap, and one day they grew together. It's a miracle. That's a miracle. That's my
You
testimony.
didn't do braces?
I didn't have
Oh,
braces. I
wow,
did not.
wow.
Joking. But I think a big part of that is I really was just trying to find my outlet, and so writing really became that. And I went to college. I received a journalism degree in mass communications, and in school, in my undergrad program, I thought to myself, I don't know if I'm truly starting to like all of the things that I'm learning about journalism in the field. They do sometimes teach you how to agenda set, slant your writing for a larger purpose, a larger agenda. And most of the time it's really given to you by whichever, team or, outlet you might be working with. And
Mhm.
so I started to explore other parts of my identity that I wanted to really probably enter into. But at the same time, I had my first son, my one and only son. I say first son, but I have a nephew that I treat as my son too. But I had a son, and I was 19. I turned 20 the very next day. And that kind of level set a lot for me. I had to then think, okay, well, how am I going to take my current skill set as well? I've also been kind of thinking about whether I wanted to do journalism long term, and what am I going to do? Because what's really important to me right now is creating the ability to be with my son. And
Yes.
as a journalist, sometimes you're waking up 4 a.m., 5 a.m. in the morning to catch a
Gotta
story.
find the story. Yeah.
I was like, can't do that at this stage. And although I did have a support system, it was really my responsibility that I wanted to take head on with my son. And so I started exploring these opportunities, and I found HR, so human resources. In that space, I would still be able to leverage my care or my desire to be close to people experiences because of my own. And so I knew, of course, there was some level of me being able to grow within that, because HR is a broad, field where there's so many specialties and niches.
Absolutely.
And so I went down the path of HR. I went right back to school. I did my MBA in human resources. And I don't know, there was still something just tugging at me that wanted to be closer to the altruistic side of people and to really solve people problems. And so then I started doing more research again. And I don't know why, but there's always this thing with me where I have to keep learning, right? I love it.
Yes, you can't
I
stop.
can't stop learning. So I went back to school again, and that's when I discovered IO psychology and I pursued my PhD in it. I always had a love for understanding how people think, understanding my own experience and how I thought and what went into some of my choices and decisions. I didn't necessarily want to do clinical psychology because I do still think my target audience will always be the workplace and helping people to really manage those different, behaviors where they probably spend most of their time, which is at work.
Absolutely.
So I pursued PhD in IO psychology after much research and understanding that this was something very aligned with my interests.
Man, that was amazing. And I'm so grateful for your confidence and your transparency and sharing your story, trusting that someone that's listening will know, hey, I'm a 19-year-old mom about to be 20, and my life is still big and full and bright, and I
Yeah,
can achieve whatever my heart so desires. So
yeah,
thank you so much for sharing that. Definitely.
absolutely.
And the next question asks, in today's workforce, how would you begin to address psychological safety? And so I would say one of the clients that I'm assisting right now, you know, especially in today's world, we want to make sure that we are kind,
Mhm.
that we are being thoughtful and considering, having empathy, considering the thoughts of the other person, especially when having necessary conversations, and making sure that they feel safe.
Mhm.
But sometimes, as we talked about how people think, there may be some toxicity there and it may go south. So,
Absolutely.
how do you advocate for psychological safety in the work that you do?
You know what? My work always has to be personal, and that's my constant cornerstone and my why. And my story plays a large part into why psychological safety was part of a central focus in my career. And these days, to your point, the workforce has changed, and we're no longer working or navigating within a system that you can ignore someone's experience at work. And so psychological safety is no longer a nice to have or, something that only the good companies do. Technically, we're working on that in a lot of organizations, but the best companies understand psychological safety is centering humans, it's centering the people in the business. And it's also, as we know, we talk about diversity and inclusion today. That's a hot topic more
Yes.
than ever. But we all know the data on that too. Companies that are more diverse are the most innovative companies out there, right? They can retain team members, people are engaged, and people want to show up. So psychological safety is relatively newer term to describe employee experience and what that entails.
Mhm.
But I really like to look at people as the whole person. I don't think we
Absolutely.
can ignore those four quadrants of, mind, mental, emotional, spiritual, right? And the physical of humans anymore. Because if one of those quadrants is off, you're going to see it, you're going to recognize it, not just in that engagement that you might have or that interaction with a person, but obviously in their work, right? So I also think psychological safety is very interlinked and correlated to healthy productivity. And
Absolutely.
if you want to have healthy productivity in the workplace, you have to consider how everyone shows up to work. They might bring something into that workplace. And a lot of my research actually was focused on employee mental health. So, employee mental health has so many prongs, it's multi pronged, it has so many themes that boil back down to who is that person? How do they identify? What culture are they coming from? How do they interact with people inside of the work, but what's happening in their life outside of work too? There's reciprocity there too. So I think organizations have to operationalize what psychological safety looks like. You also have to embed it within your practices, make it measurable. So we talk a lot about employee engagement surveys. How are we truly doing? What's the feedback loop? How are we training people in positions of leadership to be better people managers rather than just being good at a job?
Yes.
Because these conversations and interactions with leaders affect people's lives and the productivity of the organization. So there's a lot in there. Mm-hmm.
And when you look at the bottom line, there's so many factors that contribute to that. Like you said, in terms of productivity, someone is not going to be on their A game if
Mm-hmm.
they've had a death in the family. They're
Right.
not going to be on the A game if they're thinking about the reduction in force.
Right.
That's happening all around. They're not going to be producing their best if they're thinking about, man, can I put food on the table tomorrow? Like, how much is that going to cost? And budgeting that. So just, having those pulse surveys, like you mentioned, making sure that you're tapped in and knowing honestly, having that transparency,
Right.
whether, I remember back in the COVID-19, there were town halls, but just I love to introduce them today is Wednesday, that winning workplace Wednesday. Are you spending time to give a listening ear to your team? Do you know
Yeah.
what's happening? Because sometimes some people like to take surveys, some people don't. They may
Yeah.
have survey fatigue, but just making sure that you have a pulse and you get to know your people and you're curating a culture where people want to come in, right? And they
Yeah.
want to dip that Monday into a little bit of glitter and continue to let it flow for the rest of the week. So I completely agree when it comes to productivity. You have to have the whole triune being aligned so that they can
Right.
bring their best out for
And
sure.
here's something you also said, Tish, that's really important about survey fatigue and people constantly taking employee engagement surveys, experience surveys, or pulse checks. And you know what? I think that more than just them being fatigued, they're just tired of not seeing anything implemented.
Change.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's really something about how are we actually embedding what they just shared with us into our practices.
Yeah.
And another big thing about that is sometimes because there isn't that psychological safety in
Mm-hmm.
the surveys, although it's anonymous, obviously, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes there's this fear of retaliation. Oh my goodness, if I
Aha.
thing.
Yes.
Well, they know who said it. Will it be me? I've
Yeah.
actually experienced organizations where we're doing these, engagement surveys, these pulse surveys, but even in the surveys, I can tell people aren't sharing everything that they've experienced
Correct.
because I've
Correct.
talked to them one-on-one,
Correct.
in the HR and conversation. And so
Mhm.
I think a lot of that fatigue is just being tired that nothing is changing, to your point.
And so I am going to shout out DEI. I am not ashamed of it. And
Yeah.
getting my certification last summer from Cornell in DEI. And there's so many psychologists, IO psychologists that are there. And one case that they mentioned, it was an organization, and I don't remember the name. They had norms, they established norms during their meetings. And they
Mhm.
would have the little ding a ding ding. Like if someone were not adhering to the norms, but more importantly, the importance of not group thinking,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
importance of understanding the inclusion. We
Mm.
want to hear everyone's voice.
Right.
We want to know the truth. We
Mm.
cannot make a change if everyone is going to say what they think the leader wants to
Right.
hear.
Right.
We have to be honest. And
Right.
if that's one person,
Mm.
being the maverick, you have to be fearless and
Yeah.
share the authentic, unadulterated truth. And like, we need to make a change.
Right.
One organization I'm working with, I'm like, hey, this is an ism. This
Yeah.
continues to be a pattern. And until we implement some strategies to combat that, we're going to be in the same place next year. So let's
Right.
continue scheduling those meetings, putting our agenda together, bringing in, you know, some other subject matter experts that can help us move the needle and getting us where we need to go.
Absolutely.
You know. The next question I have is so perfectly aligned. In a world where soft skills are gaining increasing value, how should IO psychologists help organizations
Mhm.
integrate emotional intelligence, empathy, and conflict resolution into
Mhm.
leadership development programs? So, into PD.
Right, absolutely. I think that's such a beautiful question. And I think a lot of the answer is in the question, because when you think of soft skills, and even traditionally, soft skills are always usually towards the bottom of a job description.
Yes.
They're like the last spot, like, of course, we want that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then there's another aspect of that where for a long time, the stereotype for women has been that females are better at having soft skills. And so sometimes soft skills get siloed into a certain place in the workplace or in certain roles in the workplace that a lot of research has shown that only females or women have done really well at, like maybe HR
Yes.
and maybe at something administrative. And I think right now, more than ever, some of our greatest leaders in the world lack soft skills.
Oh, yes. You are dropping bombs now, sister. You are dropping bombs.
You
Absolutely. Yes.
know? And the lack of soft skills is a reflection of the change that will or will not take place. And I think that it has to be the backbone of leadership. Emotional intelligence is so key. And unfortunately, a lot of times people who do really well at a job, which is what I was alluding to a little earlier, are promoted because they know the domain, they know how to do something with their eyes closed. And so the apparent next step for them is leadership, even if they have no soft skills. And that is what challenges, once again, the person's experience at the workplace, but it's also sometimes, and most of the times, a bottleneck in getting the work done. If someone doesn't have emotional intelligence, empathy, they don't know how to successfully resolve conflict, they're going to fail as a leader.
Yes.
And leadership isn't about having this power dynamic over others. And it's not even just about delegating work and being successful at doing that. That's great. That's a great skill set. But these are not buzzwords. These are true competencies
Yes. Yes.
that are skills, just like any other skill that it took you to be successful in your last role, in your individual contributor role. You have to practice these skills in order to grow the muscle. And if you don't have emotional intelligence, you're going to lose team members. There's going to be terrible retention, a complete revolving door for your team, and probably your company if it's also being ignored. So sometimes leadership is really a trickle down effect from the C-suite and how they may or may not have those soft skills as well. And so you'll see it happen again and again where companies will fail or their people will leave and they're going to have to waste time having to find somebody else to replace them. And it's always going to happen again and again because you're lacking competencies that you have to exercise. You have to exercise soft skills. So I think IO psychologists, going back to your question, they really have to embed these competencies in training. You're not even being considered for leadership unless you've gone through a training that doesn't just include the soft skills, but sometimes cultural competency. Because that's a big one, right?
And I'm telling you, in grad school, Hafstede, he did such wonderful research in terms of the international dimensions of culture within business. It's a real thing. It's a real thing, whether you're looking at Asia, Africa, you cannot just walk into a meeting the same way to every meeting. It just doesn't work that way, and so we would definitely be kidding ourselves should we not have that inclusion, should we not consider the other person or have that other voice.
Right.
Having that other voice, it really seasons the pot. It can show us blind spots.
Absolutely. I think that's extremely important. And sometimes, there's that bias that comes into play, cultural competency, and goes back to why creating equitable and inclusive environments is so important because, if you don't know that, or if you're not aware, self-awareness is key. If you're not self-aware that you don't have these competencies, then you're going to have so many more challenges, even if that's not your intention. Obviously, we know that, but you're going to have so much more of those challenges it's going to be harder to work yourself out of it. So we also have to evaluate leaders on what they were trained on before they could become a leader. That becomes a part of their performance evaluation.
Absolutely. Just because you're a leader today does
Mm-hmm.
not mean that you're going to be a leader tomorrow.
Right.
Have you demonstrated that track record, right?
Yes.
When we look at our rubric and we're doing that performance review, do you really I'm to the point where I advise my clients, I don't care if the leader's bringing a lot of money.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
bringing a lot of money with these clients on the right hand, and they're
Mm.
costing a lot of money with these suits for people suing us because this person was not a very
Right.
empathetic leader.
It was not.
It's a catch 22.
Yes.
Oh my
It's
goodness.
unfortunate.
So
It
I'm
has.
glad that individuals like you are able to also point out, like, hey, we need to go through a training program. We need to make sure that it's right and tight
Mm-hmm.
before we say, yeah, you're officially, or you're going to stay in this position,
Right.
right? That we've set up the systems in place that we can do that whether it's biannually or annual audit and review to make sure that we're going in the right direction. The next question lines up. Well, this has been perfect, divine set of questions for you. How do you see the intersection of mental health and
Mhm.
productivity evolving in the next decade? Right?
Right.
Today is 2025, looking into 2030, 2035, especially considering the increasing awareness and importance of mental health in work. I mean, when I think of
Mm-hmm.
some of the experiences like Virginia Tech, somebody comes in with a gun. I mean,
Mm.
there's just been so many tragedies over the years.
Right. Absolutely. I think the world is getting to be a crazier and crazier place every day, to your point, where things like that are happening. And you have to think of the experience that people are not just having outside of work, but now inside of work. And
Yes.
so a lot of organizations, well, let me not say a lot of, a handful of organizations have started to notice that trend. Maybe I'll give you 5 to 10 years ago, and they've started actually embedding wellness programs
That's right.
into their DNA, right? And that was a big part of my research. I think a lot of times what we've seen more conversations about is how does that leader really implement wellness into their specific teams, or how do leaders manage that with, you know, their different groups, but really nobody is paying attention to that one-to-one or that individual contributor, or the mental health is important at work too, but how that really affects them as well. And so I think there are tons of interventions now, especially based on how quickly can we do this now with AI. I know there's different talk tracks on that on either side. I think obviously we have to be careful with that. But there's also this very imperative moment where we have to embed wellness training and these different interventions into the organization. We also have to create more teams that are specifically purposed on enabling leaders to be more aware of what's going on, right? That whole person I talked about earlier in those 4 quadrants. How can you identify if a team member is not doing well? How can you identify if something that just happened at work really affected them? How are you walking forward from that? Are you pulling them to the side when you see something's happening? You know, I had a really great leader early in my career. When I was doing my MBA program, I was also working. And I remember my commute was extensive. It was long. It was like an hour and a half to get to work, and an hour and a half, obviously, to get back in time to pick up my son from school, after school, and then to go back home. And it was a lot going on, right? It was challenging to balance that. But also outside of that, you know, I'm in this program where I'm also tired. So, you know, you might see me going to my car, have lunch, and I would take a nap. And
Yeah.
my leader was great. To this day, I still
That's
keep in touch with
awesome.
her because she knew what was happening, and she pulled me to the side and said, "Hey, Kristelle, you know, I'm just checking in with you to see how you're doing. And, you know, I'm noticing that, you know, you're tired, or I'm noticing that some mornings that a little bit later." And instead of penalizing me and saying, "Oh my goodness, you're late. We're going to have to talk. We're going to put you on a performance improvement plan," right? Because I was doing really well, even within those hours. She
Yes.
said, you know what, let's just change your hours. Let's
Yes.
just make it so you can get to work on time within the
Yes.
time frame it takes you to get to
Yes.
work.
Yes. Right.
And it's cool, you know,
Easy fruit. Easy
right,
fix. Low hanging
so
fruit.
fun. You know, well, you leave early, make sure you can get your son from school. And
Mhm.
Sundays, you know, let's bake in remote days.
Yeah.
So if you know it's a challenge to get to work, that's fine. Let's bake in a remote day once or twice a week. And that changed my entire perspective of
Awesome.
how I saw myself as a leader in the future, but also it changed the trajectory of my work.
Yes.
And I started to do even better than I was doing. I
Yes.
remember.
You wanted to just honor that person for seeing you.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I always think back to that because there are some leaders who won't understand that because they're not even present with themselves, unfortunately, at times.
Absolutely.
So, this is why it's important to bake this into organizations, create wellness tracks, or
Yeah.
even periods where you have a rest cycle. So,
Yeah.
some companies are baking in sabbaticals, like, hey,
Mhm.
with your tenure, you know, there's a month off here,
Yeah.
take this time off, or, you know, I think all companies should really be doing that because everybody is a human and
Yeah.
shows up to work.
Yes.
You never know what's going on outside of that.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
You know, there's so many sides of us, right? There's
Right.
family, there's work, there's church, there's so many. I just want to shout out Hilton Worldwide because they do that. They have sabbatical.
Mhm.
And it's not only for senior,
Right.
regular employees. Like we're all humans, we're all adulting here. And so everybody deserves that equitable chance to have that reprieve, to
Mhm.
restore, to renew, to come back fresh so that they
Right.
can continue, matriculating at
Mhm.
work. Thank you
Right.
for that answer. That was really good. We are now going to question number 6. What's your take on the ethical implications of employee experience design? The idea of creating tailored, highly engaging work environments using psychological principles.
Mhm. Yeah,
So the,
absolutely.
the follow-up question I really like the follow-up question. Where do we draw the line between engagement and manipulation? And it's so interesting because when you were talking about that leader who said, you know what, Krista, let's just change your hours. Let's just change your
Yeah.
hours. Let's bake in some remote days. I think about one leader that I had, um, when you were talking, I started thinking about this leader, and then I started thinking about the boss that I had at the time. And he was like, man, you
Mhm.
are being micromanaged, Tish. That is too much information you just shared. And
Yeah.
I was like, it's okay, but as I think back now, I mean, that was 10 years ago. As I think back now, there was a little bit of manipulation and control.
Mhm.
Hindsight is 2020 from that
Right.
particular leader. So just I think the employee experience is important that we have
Yeah.
that and
Mhm.
that we allow each person to share their experience and not
Right.
have such a hard thumb where it is in fact manipulation. So I would love to hear your take on
Yeah.
that question.
Right. I think employee experience, there's so much room to be creative and innovative with that. Um, I think of people and I think that there are usually needs we know, right? There are usually things we're aware of. And sometimes employee experience design, you know, we'll think of things like perks around the office. Like, you know, I think sometimes it helps, right? When somebody's hungry and they need to have a granola bar, right? Or there's apples, right? Or there's food there for them to snack on. Yeah, you might be hungry. But how about we create timelines, or how about we create the structure and boundary that when it's lunchtime, we're making sure you actually get up to get.
Good. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
How about we make sure that we're actually paying you enough to get up and get lunch? Because
Yes.
sometimes they're like, man, I can't go out to eat because I can't afford lunch right now. Right.
Yes.
Or encouraging them, you know, like if you can't, we're going to have a lunch together one day. We're not going to talk about work. We're going to do this and that. I think that's a better way to leverage a perk like having free snacks and things around the office, couple them together. Another big part about that is sometimes, you know, with the employee experience to your point about micromanagement, people may try to, um, there's something that I've seen happen before. I'll take a step back and say, I've seen that some people try to make work feel interesting by leveraging gamification. Saying, oh, if you continue to do a little bit more work here and there, or take this extra training on our LMS or do this and that, this will really help you. I think we should be paying attention to, what does this person want to learn?
Yes.
It may not be this role. That's one of the things another one of my leaders had done a really great job at doing. You may not even want to be in this role for a long time.
And it's okay.
And it's okay, right? So I'm not going to gamify or create manipulative, reward systems that keep you pigeonholed in this domain or in this career, because you might be here understanding that obviously you're going to learn a lot from this, but you probably really want this to just propel you to the next step, which is a lot of people, right? And careers, we now know, are not linear. So you can't assume that, someone wants to be a leader in their next job. Someone wants to do X, Y, and Z because that's the path that we've created. That's the structure. These are the roles that we have identified for someone successful in this role. Employee experience is paying attention to that person's experience and making sure that you understand them, what's important to them. Maybe they want to do data outside of the workplace, but they're in a totally different role right now. How can I give you or offer you learning opportunities that put you in those places, in those spaces? Autonomy is a very big one.
Critical.
They want to be a leader. I can't micromanage you and expect you to grow a leadership skill set. I can't strip away your purpose and your growth if I'm micromanaging you. And so I think a lot of that has to just be understanding that people are human and they are not a monolith. They're going to have an array of different interests, curiosities, passions, and leaders should be aware of that so they don't dwindle that or they don't shroud the real growth that someone may be looking for. So employee experience and how we design that is really about listening. Do a listening tour. These are why those surveys are important, and engaging them from that point so you know what's important to them. There shouldn't be room for manipulation when you're creating it around what those interests are for the people.
I just want to add, that was beautifully stated. Kudos on this answer. I would just add a little bit and say, I've found in my experience that some leaders have their own vision of what they want for the organization, a vision for that employee of what they want that employee to do for the organization, and don't have the respect that this employee is not your child.
Right.
This employee does not have to walk by the beat of your drum. This employee can so choose, even though they may be a senior HR ops person. If they want to go into radiology, go to radiology. I want you to be happy. I want you to get, what you want to get, and not necessarily be my next right-hand person because I know you can do the job. Making sure that we really cut the puppeteer strings, empower that employee to have a voice, share what they want to do so that we can help them to get the experience that they want and to ultimately get their next.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that.
Okay, I am going to, that was good. We are almost finished. How do you think the concept of work-life balance, we talked a little bit about this in the last question, will evolve as more people work remotely? And, there's a blurring of the lines between work and home.
Absolutely. I think I was fortunate to have had hybrid models and remote work before COVID started. So in some organizations, I really got to experience the benefit of having days in and out of the office, like I shared with you before as well, but also working 100% remote which to me really changed my idea of what work-life balance meant. There is this piece of work-life balance where working from home, sometimes you're always on, and it feels like you almost have to always be on because you're technically, more fluid, or you have the ability to have your laptop out. There's
You just do it. Just do it.
you don't have a commute, right? So,
Yeah.
you might get on earlier and you might stay on a little bit later. I've had someone actually, that happened to me. I fell into that pitfall at one point because it's natural for me to be on. It's natural for me to really want to work hard to achieve something. And I'm going to put a pin in working hard and come back to that and the definition of what that truly means. But I think the pitfall I fell into was I was working earlier and I was working 12-hour days when technically this is an 8-hour job. And I think I was just so excited about, oh my goodness, I have a little bit more space to work more. And I really want to finish this project because I know it's going to be great if I just do it right.
Yes.
And I fell into that, and I had to have a leader say, oh, please don't feel like you have to do this, and don't. Please.
Good leader.
Right. And that embodied in me as a leader when I really, really, truly understood what leadership meant. I always ask any team member to shut down.
Yeah.
It's almost a thing like, if you're excited about doing your project, I'm hoping that excitement continues on till tomorrow. Let's put it
You can do it
tomorrow. If there's a deadline, let's create the system that makes sure by this date we have it done, right? You should never be speeding to finish or rushing to finish something because there's a deadline and you're staying up later to hit that deadline. We need to rework a little bit of what's on your desk to make sure that you're focused on the projects and the task and the work that is most meaningful to the goals that we have for a team and for the organization. And maybe broader than that, if we have goals that I've baked in or you've baked in based on your own interests, let's make sure we're doing that within the time constraints you have. Please don't work late. I think there's going to be a time where maybe we can even kick people offline, or
that'd be cool.
Cool, right?
Go out.
Probably already exists. If somebody knows that, please share it with me.
Yeah.
But we have to define digital boundaries in the new normal in our workspaces and workplaces. Just because we can work anytime doesn't mean that we should. And I think that one of the things I do even with my own business and my teams is I don't care what time you're working, right? I don't care if it's at 11 o'clock, if that's your jam, right? And you say, man, I get the best ideas at night, or man, I get the best ideas at 6 a.m. And then I'm going to come offline around 9 a.m. I think the future of work will involve more asynchronous, work. It's going to have a lot of more flexibility for leaders who are going to be successful. And there's going to be an intentional detachment from work because we all know, once again, people have their own interests. People have their own lives, their own families, their own goals that they want to achieve. And I don't want to stand in the way of that. This work shouldn't stand in the way of it. It should enable you to do it. So I think that's where the future of our work will go. And I'm excited about that because I think it's going to unlock a lot more potential in people.
I love it. What has been your greatest trophy moment before we wrap up?
Mm-hmm. Oh, man, my greatest trophy moment, I think it was the discipline I found in myself by finishing my doctoral degree. And it was something that I committed to myself when I had my son. I knew I wanted to never stop doing what I set out to do. And I always had to find myself in those moments. And so, man, I think that would probably be my trophy moment. And alongside meeting really great professionals and people who are influential, just like you, Tish, through Forbes, I'm really happy that I was able to join that council because I'm now learning from others and at a certain scale. And I think that's one of the things that I appreciate the most about my now. I think at every moment there's an opportunity to see the trophy moment. So I would say maybe those are my top two in today's time.
I just want to say shout out to your son. He has such a blessed mom. Like, that's so great. I'm so proud of you. Thank you so much for taking the time. Where can our audience follow you and get to, just to get more from you?
Absolutely. So I'm also a founder of my own business called The Creative Corporate. You can find that on thecreativecorporate.com. We are going through a rebrand. I'm excited about that. So you can also find us on Instagram at It's The Creative Corporate. Find me personally at Dr. Kristelle, Dr. Kristelle, Instagram, TikTok. If it will stay till tomorrow, all the other social platforms. And I'll
Yeah. Thank you so much, team. Thank you for listening. Remember all that you've learned here. Focus on the individual, listen, pursue your dreams. Sky's the limit. Until next time, keep shining. Toodles.